Hello and welcome to Mostly Vintage Cameras. This is an Ensign 2¼ box camera. Now I meant to make this video last week and I had a film in this camera which I finally got around to developing, but it had been in there for a couple of years and in fact the results had ended up being pretty poor. So I very quickly dashed out last weekend and took some more pictures around the neighbourhood, and those are the ones we'll be seeing today. Now this camera is dated from around about 1923. In fact, it's based on a camera from 1912. The only real difference being the 23 version has this fold out wire sports finder, which is kind of tricky to show you how it works, but you frame your subject within this wire hoop and you try and get the camera level, and then you can take your picture pretty quickly. Now the reality is that whilst this is a very crude entry-level camera, it was by no means state of the art even for the turn of the century. It's not without some features that we should investigate. So let's go ahead and take a look at it, and we'll start by opening the film chamber and seeing the insides. There's a little latch here, and this is quite a nice little design. It's kind of a cam, so as you close it, it pulls the back further in for help with the light proofing. So if I slide this down, open the back, and you might just be able to make out there's a recess around the film door, and then there's a rim around the box of the camera. So as you put the door closed and you do the latch up, you're pulling the tongue and the groove together. So that's quite a nice feature. The camera is largely made out of wood with a paper leatherette covering. To remove the inside, which one has to do, you twist and pull out the film advanced winder. That releases the main mechanism of the camera. So then we have two parts of the camera. Essentially we have the shutter and the exposure system with the viewfinders, and we have the lens and the film transport part of the camera. So let's take a look at this individually. And I think we'll just take a quick look at the inside of this door. We have some message here. To obtain the best results with this camera, ask for 2¼ Ensign Speedy Film, made in Great Britain. So, yep, this is made in Great Britain. It was made around about Walthamstow in London, and as I say, it wasn't intended to be a premium quality camera. Even Ensign had better cameras at this time. It was intended to be a relatively inexpensive device. I've seen a few adverts for it, and the lowest price I've seen it advertised at in a contemporary advert from the period was 13 shillings and sixpence. Now that's obviously in pre-decimal currency. There were 24 shillings to a pound and 240 pence to a pound. So 13 shillings and sixpence in decimal currency would be about 70p. Now obviously 70p in 1923 isn't the same as 70 pence in 2024. So in terms of buying power, what you could purchase for your 70p, it would be similar to spending about £50 in the modern age. So it was similar to Kodak M35 or an Ilford Sprite Mark II 35, that sort of reusable, disposable type camera. That was the kind of market it was aimed at. That was the kind of price it sold for. So moving back to the film transport, press seal and card. Remarkably, it uses standard 120 film, which means it is entirely possible to use it in the modern age. And very usefully, it's got the empty spool should be inserted with the slotted keyway towards this hole. We place it in the body so that the arrow points to the winding key on the outer body, and the winding key being this bit that we had to pull out to remove the camera insert. 120 film readily available these days, all sorts of types and sizes, black and white and colour, Kodak, Ilford and many others. So my apologies if there was a jump in the edit there. I just dashed off to find this, which is a 120 roll film backing paper which I've re-spooled on the roll. so I can show you how this camera is loaded more properly. But whilst I have this, let's take a little look at the anatomy of a 120 film. It comes all round up like this with a bit of tape on it. You tear the paper tape and you get the unexposed message here. And as you pull it out, you pull it out, pull it out, pull it out, and eventually you get this double-headed arrow. This is your start arrow. Now some cameras, particularly later cameras, have an index point, and when this arrow lines up with a little orange or red marker, that's where you close the back and wind onto the first frame. It's not quite the case with this, but that's what this double-headed arrow is for. Then as we move on, we start to see arrows warning you that you're getting close to the film. Then, this is an Ilford film. They use ascending sizes of circles to warn you as you get nearer the first frame. But that's frame 1, and that's frame 1. And over here is also frame 1. And these frame numbers line up with the viewing window on different cameras. So if your camera took 6x4 or 5 film or photographs, you would have an orange window here. If it took 6x6, it would be here. And on this camera it takes 6x9 centimetre photographs, so the window's down on this side. So it depends where the window is, depends on what format of photograph your camera takes. So 120 is a multi-format film. Let's just wind that all back up again. Now what you don't want to do when you take a 120 roll film out of the packet is pull the tape away and drop it on the floor, because then it will unspool and it will be ruined, of course. But in this camera, we've put the take-up spool in the way directed on the camera insert. We're going to put our new roll of film in the small at the start. Just pull these wings away and it'll clip into place. We're just going to pull this out. Bring it up over the top and insert it into the slot. If we can, we're going to start winding this to make sure the film is caught. If you were to just put it in the camera like this, it would almost certainly be fine. I'm just going to use a screwdriver just to make sure I've got one roll of one wrap of film there, and we can see the double-headed arrow is now level with this first roller. So I'm going to pop all that back inside the camera. That all slides in. Now I'm going to twist and slide the take-up winder in place. That takes up a bit of tension in the film. Then close the back and continue winding. It'll be very hard to see on the video, but in this window we're looking for those little ascending size circles. Arrows are warning me I'm getting close. There's one circle, there's another, and another. Bang, there's number one. So we're now loaded our film, ready to take photographs, which means we need to turn our attention to the shutter mechanism and all that offers in terms of exposure. I can tell you now that this flat-bladed screwdriver is going to come in handy in a second. So the camera's, although it's basic, it's not without some controls. This is the shutter speed control. It has two settings, instantaneous and time. This is the shutter release lever, and this piece of metal here, which is ruinous on your fingernails, I can just prise that out. But it has three aperture settings, which are f11 with it fully inserted, f16 at the first indent, and f22 when you put it all the way out to the second indent. So we're going to go around, we're going to go about taking a photograph at f11, and all we do is we flip the shutter. That's it. The shutter speed, it varies camera to camera, around about a 30th to a 50th is typical. So having taken our first picture, we need to remember to wind on. So we're looking in the window, here come the circles, there's frame 2. So I'm going to take a second picture, and the viewfinders, there's one here at the top for vertical frames, and there's one here at the side for horizontal frames. So you would hold this at waist height, you would rest your thumb on the release and gently slide it over. Now I've just made one of the classic mistakes that you can make with these cameras, which is I tripped the shutter twice without winding on between frames. So that frame is now a double exposure. Or it would be if it was an actual real film, not just a backing paper. So I'm winding on to frame 3. And let's investigate these apertures. Let's investigate the time setting. So instantaneous means every time you flip the lever, it takes a picture. And it takes a picture when you flip it up, and it takes a picture when you flip it down. And it's just tripping a rather crude shutter that you can probably see behind the lens here, or behind the opening here. Now in time mode, it does something slightly different. When I trip the shutter, it opens, and when I trip the shutter again, it closes. So now I can take long exposures. Weirdly, the other thing you can do with the time setting is use flash. So what you would do is you would cover the lens with something opaque. Probably get that out of the way. Open the shutter, expose the lens, fire the flash, close the lens, close the shutter. You want to get the exposing the film and firing the flash and covering the lens again as quickly as you can, because you don't want ambient lighting ruining your flash exposure. The other thing to remember is if you want to take a regular time exposure of several seconds or minutes or whatever you wish, you can just open the shutter, leave the camera to its own devices and then close it, but you are running the risk of jiggling the camera by moving the shutter. If you gently cover the lens, open, you can start your exposure and stop it by covering the lens gently with an opaque item. It just means you get less camera shake. So there's a couple of ways you can use the time mode. Now on this particular model, it does have a slightly irritating habit. When you're in instantaneous, let's say it takes a picture and you're done, it has a horrible habit of drifting over to time. And when I run the second roll of film through here, I only got 7 pictures instead of the 8 pictures that I was expecting, because the last frame I hadn't checked and it was on time exposure. So I took my picture and wardened off, and of course the lens was kept open until I realised. So always check you're in instantaneous shooting. Now the apertures, I'll put it back into time and open the shutter. Now we can see, hopefully you can see fairly clearly, we've got a round aperture blade, so you should get quite a nice bokeh on this. That's f11. If I slide this out, which is quite tricky to do without any fingernails, we get f16, smaller aperture, and then finally f22. My view is whenever possible you're probably going to want to use it on 16 or 22, but obviously with a fixed shutter speed you're kind of limited to the lighting at the time. So this really is a camera for sunny days. Now I mentioned the price of this earlier. In reality a lot of people didn't pay for them at all. These were, as I say, inexpensive cameras and were often used as promotional goods. So if you took out a subscription to certain magazines, as a free gift for taking out the subscription, you would get an Ensign 2¼ camera, and you would also get a roll of speedy film. Now Ensign speedy film, as far as I can figure, is around about 25 ISO in modern terms. ISO wasn't really a term used in 1923, so speedy film was a relative term. I'm going to wind this film all the way on now to the end. You also got these cameras free if you collected tokens from certain products. Most notably, cigarette packets would have tokens in, and you saved up enough, and you could send off and get your free Ensign 2¼ So wind. This is the other issue with these sites for cameras. Whilst it's perfectly possible to take a double exposure, it's also possible to think, did I wind on after the last picture? I'll wind on an extra frame just to be sure. So you can easily get blank frames here. Now, with the film completely used and wound on, to take the film out, we again have to twist and pull the wind on key, open the camera back, and pull out the insert. And we'll find that magically the film that had, the spool that had film on now has not, and what was the empty take-up spool now has the exposed photographs on it. 120 film generally has a tag at the end telling you what sort of film it was. Particularly with black and white film, you're going to want to develop different films at different temperatures and times, so it's important to know what it was. And generally you would fold this over. This tag extends, you see it's torn now, and it has an adhesive gum label, so you have to lick the disgusting tasting glue and stick it down. And you want to make sure it's wound on tightly so that you don't want to pull it and overstress it, but you want to make sure that there's no chance of light sneaking in between the backing paper and the film, and then you send it off to be processed. So there it is, that's the Ensign 2¼ There was a 2¼ if you were curious. Now this camera takes pictures this size, which is 6 by 9 centimeters or 2¼ by 3¼ inches, also sometimes called an 8-on because you get 8 pictures on a 120 film. The 2¼ was a 2¼ square format, so 6 by 6, 2¼ by 2¼ also sometimes called a 12-on because you've got 12 pictures on a 120 film. Around about 1930, these cameras were upgraded, for want of a better expression, to what they called, I think it was either a duo distance or an all distance, and essentially there was an extra lever put in the control panel that dropped in what amounted to a close-up lens, so you could take distant views and then you could take closer pictures of your friends and family. Let's go ahead and look at some pictures I took with this. Now the first picture is the best picture I got off the black and white roll of film. This was taken on a winter's evening in a dark underpass, as you can see, and it was a time exposure of possibly as much as 30 seconds. Now I used a tripod obviously, and there is no tripod mounting on this, which is a little bit irritating. So if you want to use a tripod you have to improvise, as I did, by strapping it to a gimbal head with some rubber bands, which actually worked surprisingly well. Now I'll show you the next black and white picture. This is the second best picture I got out of this roll of black and white film, and as you can see things are going wrong quite quickly and they only got worse from here. So I'm not going to show you any more of that first roll of film. It was my fault for leaving the film in the camera for probably a couple of years. We're looking at the rest of the colour photographs. As I say, there's only 7 of them. This is the first one I took, which is slightly into the sun. It's only slightly into the sun, and yet the flare is dramatic. So you probably want to have the sun at your back when you use this camera. Now if you get the sun to your back, the viewfinders aren't the best. When I took this picture there was a lot less sky in the viewfinder and a lot more of the foreground. Nonetheless, it's a pretty decent picture. The things I really like about this are the muted colours and the low contrast. Really quite a pleasing aesthetic. Now as we move further on we start to get light leaks, and I think it's because the film wasn't tightly enough wound, which is entirely my fault of course. But the light leaks were mostly between the frames, so I'm not quite sure if that was the problem or the problem lies somewhere else. But nonetheless we got some usable pictures, and part of the joy of using old cameras is to get pictures that look like they were taken with old cameras. Little river scene. Again, the park bench tractor seats in the left hand bottom corner, they were more in the scene than this picture shows, so it's again not framed as well as one would like. This one however this is a very dull photograph, but I particularly wanted to take it to see if the text on the estate agent sign on the right hand edge was legible, and it absolutely is. You wouldn't really expect the edge of the frame on a single meniscus lens like this to be quite as sharp as it is, but there it is. And then we have another park bench type scene with a notice in front. It's quite hard to read the signage, but that's because the paint on the signage that picks out the letters is flaking. Nothing to do with the resolution of the camera. So there's one last picture, again a river scene with less flare in it. And I think the colours are very nice. I think the low contrast is very nice. And again, surprising amount of sharpness for what is ultimately an antique. So there we have it. That's been the Ensign 2¼ or Ensign 2¼ I know people are going to complain in the comments about pronunciation. I believe in the UK one is meant to say Ensign, and in the US one tends to say Ensign. But there we have it. Quite a fun little thing. I might well give another box camera a go because I was quite enamoured of those pictures, and if I can just deal with that light leak issue, I think it could be quite interesting. If I can find a 2¼ and take some 6x6 pictures, that might be quite fun. But for the time being, I hope this video has been of interest or use to you, and do have a good day. Thank you for watching.